AI, right? It's making headlines left and right, and we can't resist a good deep dive. But this isn't some sci-fi future we're talking about. This is about laws being written right now in California.
Which is amazing when you think about it. Most governments are stuck trying to define AI, let alone actually regulate it.
Totally. And this bill, it didn't mess around. California tried to pass a bill, SB 2047, to regulate AI, specifically those big, powerful language models everyone's freaking out about. And get this.
Yeah.
It actually passed both the Senate and the Assembly.
Wow.
Yeah, that means it had a ton of support. But then, plot twist, the governor vetoed it.
Oh, wow.
So what we're trying to figure out today is why this bill caused such a political earthquake.
And we've got the goods, too. We're talking excerpts from the actual bill itself, statements from political heavy hitters, even a letter from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Plus, of course, the governor's explanation for saying, nope, not doing this.
This is going to be good. Okay, so one of the things that jumped out at me from the bill was how they decided which AI models fall under these new rules. It's all about computing power.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's like setting a price tag for regulation. If you're building AI that needs a ton of computing power, like hundreds of millions of dollars worth, the bill says, okay, you're dealing with some seriously heavy-duty tech. We need to keep an eye on that.
And that's where things get a little tricky. On one hand, it makes sense to target the biggest, most expensive AI systems. Those are the ones with the most potential for, well, anything really.
Right.
But this approach has some pretty big downsides.
Like what?
Well, for one, it could actually stifle innovation, especially for those smaller companies or research groups. Not everyone has millions of dollars just lying around to throw at these huge AI projects.
So it's like giving an advantage to the big tech companies who already have those resources instead of creating a level playing field.
Exactly. And then there's the fact that smaller, cheaper AI can still be used in, shall we say, less than ideal ways. Think about it. A super targeted AI system designed to, say, manipulate what you see on social media. That might not need a ton of computing power to be effective and potentially really dangerous.
It's like saying a pocket knife is fine because it's not a sword, but ignoring that, it can still do some serious damage.
Exactly. And that's something that a lot of people were worried about with this bill, including Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, wow. The Nancy Pelosi.
The one and only. And this wasn't just some random politician weighing in. She represented California in Congress for decades and was hugely influential in shaping tech policy.
Yeah, she's basically tech royalty.
Exactly. And while she agrees that we need some kind of AI regulation, she felt this bill was too much, too soon. She argued that instead of each state doing its own thing, we need national standards for AI.
Which honestly makes sense. It's like everyone's trying to create their own rules for the Wild West of AI right now, and that's just asking for a chaotic mess.
Totally. But there was another really interesting part of Pelosi's statement. She actually quoted Fei Li, who's a leading AI expert. People call her the godmother of AI.
Okay, I've heard of her. She's legit, right? Not just someone who's afraid of new technology.
Oh, yeah. She's a respected Stanford professor who helped create some of the key technologies that are driving the AI boom. And she was worried about this bill, too. She said it was too focused on how big the AI is, rather than the actual risks it poses.
There's that pocket knife analogy again.
It's a good one. And politicians and academics weren't the only ones raising red flags. The business world had some thoughts, too. And let's just say they were not thrilled.
Yeah, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce sent a pretty strongly worded letter, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. They were not happy. For those who don't know, the Chamber of Commerce is a powerful group that advocates for businesses.
They're like the voice of businesses in the government.
Exactly. And they made it very clear that they saw this bill as a big threat, particularly to smaller businesses. They argued, and this echoes what Pelosi said, that focusing on these large-scale AI systems would stifle innovation and potentially crush smaller companies that can't keep up with all the regulations.
So it's like trying to run a marathon, but some runners get a head start and a faster track while everyone else is stuck with old shoes and a bunch of obstacles in their way.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the chamber wasn't just speculating about this either. They pointed to research showing that 1/3 of small businesses in California already use AI in some way.
1 in 3, that's huge. This isn't some distant future problem we're talking about.
Exactly. This is about real businesses, real jobs, and the very real impact these regulations could have right now. The chamber argued that by focusing so much on computing power, the bill could actually prevent small businesses from using AI to grow and compete.
Okay, so we've got major political players, top AI experts, and now the business world, all raising concerns about this bill. It seems like everyone agrees that AI needs some guardrails, but maybe this bill went too far, too fast.
And that's what's so interesting about the governor's veto. It wasn't a no way, no how to AI regulation. It was more like, hold on a second, let's think about this.
So less of a hard no and more of a not like this, not yet.
Exactly. He even said that he agreed that AI needs some kind of regulation, just not this way.
So what were his big hangups with this bill?
Well, first, he kind of echoed what we were just talking about, that the bill was laser focused on the size of the AI based on its computing power instead of how risky it actually is. He was saying that smaller AI, even if it's not as powerful, could still be used in harmful ways.
Right, like that pocket knife example. A pocket knife's not a sword, but it can still do some damage.
Exactly. And that actually leads into a second point, which is that this focus on big AI could make people think that smaller AI is automatically safe, which, as we've been saying, isn't always true.
It's like assuming that a kiddie pool is fine because it's not an Olympic-sized swimming pool. You still need rules, even with the little pools.
Right. And then his third point was really about wanting to take a more cautious approach in general. He said he wants to do more research, get a better understanding of AI and the risks before rushing into creating a bunch of new regulations.
So it's like he's saying, look, we need to be prepared for AI, but let's not just make a bunch of rules without understanding the problem.
Yes, and this is where things get really interesting. If just measuring computing power isn't the answer, then how do we decide which AI needs to be regulated?
Right, like where do we even begin to draw those lines?
That is the million-dollar question. Honestly, there's no easy answer. One approach is to focus on what the AI is actually being used for. So AI that's used for something like medical diagnoses or controlling important infrastructure, that might need stricter rules than something like, say, AI that writes marketing copy or recommends movies.
So it's like regulating medicine versus regulating toys. The stakes are just higher with medicine.
Yeah. Exactly. But even that approach has some problems.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, let's say you have an AI that's used to write marketing copy, which seems pretty harmless. But what if that same technology is used to create fake news articles or try to manipulate people during an election?
So the tool itself might be fine, but it's how it's actually used that makes it dangerous.
Right, and regulating how people use something is a lot harder than regulating the thing itself.
Yeah, that seems almost impossible. It's like trying to regulate, like, thoughts.
Exactly. It's incredibly tricky. Do you try to make the algorithms themselves have ethics somehow? Do you force companies to tell you when they're using AI to influence people? Or do you wait until something bad actually happens and then try to hold people accountable?
It seems like every solution just creates a whole new set of problems.
It really does. And I'm sure this is where things got really heated in California. You have some people saying we need to act now before it's too late, and then others saying we need to be careful because too many rules could stifle innovation. Finding that balance is going to be tough. We have to protect people, but we also don't want to stop progress.
It feels like we're trying to hold the future in our hands, but we don't know what to do with it.
It's a pretty good way to put it.
Okay, so we've talked about why people want to regulate AI, the different ideas for how to do it, and why this California bill didn't work out. But we should probably talk about what the bill actually said, right?
Yeah, definitely. Understanding the specifics of what they were actually proposing will make it much clearer why people were so fired up about this.
Okay, so spill the tea. What else was in this bill that had everyone's attention?
Well, there was one section that really got people worried, and it was about what they called critical harm.
Critical harm. That sounds ominous. What counts as critical harm in the world of AI?
Some of it was pretty straightforward. It included things like using AI to develop weapons of mass destruction, which, not great.
Yeah, no one's rooting for the AI-powered apocalypse.
Right. But it also included things like big cyber attacks that could take down things like power grids or financial systems.
Okay, so preventing cyber terrorism, that makes sense as a target for regulation. What else did they include?
Well, this is where things get a little hairy. They defined critical harm as any harm that's caused by one of these AI models that results in, and I'm quoting here, significant death, injury, or property damage.
So even if it's not a WMD or a huge cyber attack, if an AI malfunctions or something and people get hurt or die, that triggers these regulations.
Yeah, that's how a lot of people read it. And the thing is, it didn't really matter if the harm was intentional or not. It was all about how bad the damage was.
So let's say a company is using AI for something good, like developing new medicines, but then something goes wrong and there's some kind of accident and people are injured. they would be in trouble even if they didn't mean for it to happen.
That was the fear, yes,
Hmm.
especially for businesses. They were worried about being held responsible for things they couldn't predict or control.
Which is tough because AI is so complicated and new, even the experts don't fully understand it yet.
Exactly. And that was a big part of the problem with this bill. It was trying to regulate something that's constantly changing and evolving.
It's like trying to write rules for a game that's still being invented.
Right. And on top of that, this critical harm definition could overlap with other regulations that already exist, which just adds to the confusion.
Oh, interesting. Can you give me an example of that?
Sure, let's talk self-driving cars.
Hmm.
California already has a bunch of regulations for self-driving cars. They cover things like safety testing and what happens if there's an accident.
Makes sense. Self-driving cars are a big deal here.
Right. But with SB 2047, if a self-driving car malfunctions and someone gets hurt, that could trigger both sets of regulations, even if the company followed all the rules for self-driving cars.
So you could have this situation where a company is following all the rules, but then this new law kicks in and says, nope, you're in trouble anyway.
It was definitely a concern, and it shows why a lot of people felt like this bill was trying to do too much too quickly without thinking about all the possible consequences.
Okay, so we've got these covered models and this critical harm definition, both pretty controversial. What else?
Well, on top of defining what AI is covered and what counts as critical harm, the bill also got really specific about what companies would have to do to comply.
Oh boy, here come the regulations.
Right. One of the big things was that developers would have to create a safety and security protocol, basically a really detailed plan for how they were going to identify and deal with any potential risks with their AI.
Which, again, sounds reasonable on the surface, right? If you're building potentially dangerous AI, it makes sense to have a plan for if things go wrong.
Right. And a lot of developers already do this anyway as part of, building AI responsibly. But this bill was really specific about what had to be in these plans. It included things like risk assessments, testing, data security, even the qualifications of the people working on the AI.
And I'm guessing that ripped some people the wrong way.
Oh, yeah. Especially smaller companies and startups. They felt like it was way too much, way too expensive, and that it would be really hard to innovate and create new things with all of these rules in place.
It's like telling a small bakery they have to build a whole new wing and hire a team of scientists before they can sell another loaf of bread. It's just not realistic for a lot of businesses.
Exactly. And remember, this is all tied back to that definition of covered models. So even if you have a really simple AI, if it just happens to be running on a powerful system, you're hit with all of these extra rules.
Which, again, just seems like it would give the big companies an advantage. They have the resources to deal with all of this, but the smaller guys, they're stuck.
It's a common theme with this bill, for
Wow.
sure. And it didn't stop there. SB 1047 also said that developers would have to get audited by a third party every single year to make sure they were following all the rules.
Ah, yes, the dreaded third-party audit. Those are never fun or cheap.
Right. And that was another thing that the Chamber of Commerce was really unhappy about. They argued that these audits would put a huge financial burden on companies, especially the smaller ones, and could actually discourage them from developing AI altogether.
So let's recap. We've got this big, broad definition of what counts as a powerful AI. We've got strict requirements for how those AIs need to be built and tested. And then on top of all that, mandatory yearly audits.
Plus, don't forget about those potential lawsuits because of that super broad definition of critical harm.
It's no wonder the governor decided to pump the brakes on this one. It seems like a classic case of good intentions, but maybe they were trying to do too much, too fast.
That's a really good way to put it, and it really highlights how hard it is to create regulations for a technology like AI, which is changing and advancing so rapidly.
Right. Like, how do you regulate something that's constantly evolving and changing right in front of you?
That is the question, isn't it? It really is. And honestly, if a state like California, with all its tech expertise and resources, couldn't quite figure this out, it does make you wonder, what's next?
Yeah, are we all just headed for AI chaos?
I wouldn't go that far. It's definitely uncharted territory, but it's not hopeless. If anything, California trying to do this, even if it didn't work out this time, is a huge step. It's making people actually talk about the future of AI. And that's happening everywhere now, not just in California.
So it's less about finding that one perfect answer right now and more about just getting the conversation going, making sure everyone understands the good and the bad when it comes to AI.
Exactly. The more we talk about this, the better prepared we'll be to make smart decisions about how AI sits into our lives.
Which takes us back to what Pelosi was saying about needing some kind of national, maybe even global rules for AI. Because if it's just every country, every state for themselves, it's going to be a nightmare for anyone trying to develop AI responsibly.
Oh, absolutely. It'd be like trying to play an online game where everyone's got different rules and controllers. Totally impossible.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so how do we go from all these different ideas and regulations to something that actually works for everyone?
$1 million question, right? For starters, I think we need to get everyone involved. I'm talking governments, tech companies, researchers, everyone. We need all the perspectives on the table.
And maybe a really, really big whiteboard.
For real. But even more important than just talking is focusing on guidelines, not rules. AI is changing so fast that whatever we put in place today could be meaningless tomorrow.
So more like guiding principles, big picture stuff.
Exactly. We need something that can change as AI changes, but that still makes sure AI is being used ethically and safely.
Makes sense. But how do you actually enforce that? Like, how do you hold companies accountable when something goes wrong? Especially since these AI systems are, like, learning and changing all the time.
That is the other $1 million question. Our old ways of regulating things don't really work here. It's hard to say what went wrong with AI. Was it the code, the data it was trained on, a human messing up?
It's like trying to solve a mystery, but the clues are always disappearing.
Right. So maybe we need to change how we think about accountability with AI. Maybe it's less about blame and more about just building systems that can catch problems early and give people a way to fix things when they go wrong.
So less about pointing fingers and more about everyone taking responsibility for making sure AI is safe and doesn't go all Terminator on us.
Exactly. We're all in this together, the people creating AI, the people making the rules, the people using it every day. We all have a role to play.
Well said. It's like we're all exploring this new frontier together. Hopefully this deep dive has given you a better sense of how complicated AI regulation is and why everyone's getting so worked up about it.
We've thrown a lot of information at you today, that's for sure.
But we want to leave you with one last thing to think about. If we shouldn't just focus on how powerful an AI is, then what should we look at when deciding how to regulate it? Is it the potential for harm? Is it how it's being used? Is it how much freedom the AI has to make its own decisions?
These are the questions we all need to be thinking about as we figure out the future of AI.
We want to hear from you. Head over to our social media and tell us what you think about AI regulation. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and we'll see you for another deep dive.